Mark Wahlberg. So, you know, many years ago there wasn't what you have today as far as access to information, right? So, I got really engaged in kind of reading about celebrities or learning about things that were happening in my world by spending time in my local library as a kid growing up. It was also a really safe place for me, where oftentimes, I would be protected from bullies who wanted to physically attack me or assault me or, sexually harass me. And I would be allowed to kind of read in peace after school and before my parents got home. And so it was like a okay place to be. And I was, there, basically from when I was maybe 8 to 14 or 15, I would be going to the library really consistently and spending hours every day after school, and then often, riding my bike or taking the bus to go on weekends as well, because in my house that was very conservative. I didn't have a television all the time, didn't have access to the internet, didn't have access to quote unquote secular materials, so I wasn't allowed to listen to music that wasn't Christian or read books and things like that. So I had to leave, from a very early age to try to be like Teen Beat, so I heard about Mark Wahlberg pretty early because, I had heard about New Kids on the Block pretty early, and wasn't a huge fan, but was appreciative of their hard work and their efforts to, not totally be rip-off artists or be, seem racist or that type of thing. And so, when Murky Mark appeared and, people kind of attacked him as a white guy who was doing rap and hip-hop and, was quote-unquote appropriating from black culture, I was like, give the kid a chance. And I was like, I like him, and as he started to do more stuff, I was like very supportive and would blog or share stuff like, oh yeah, he was in this Fear movie and different things that he was doing that, were different than the kind of standard teen or young person. He was something interesting to me. And then, I started to, hear some stories online inside of, community forums that he had a bad history of, actually having been arrested, and that Mark Wahlberg, as a young person, had assaulted some black and brown kids. And that had happened, some black and brown people, right, that he as a young person had been part of, kind of teen mobs running around and hitting people and doing things that are super unacceptable, super like not cool, that were far more common when he was growing up in the 80s. And no excuse, but again, in that time period was happening more often. And so, I kind of got a little bit sour mouth on him when I started hearing about that, and kind of was like, whatever, you're kind of fake. And so I was at an event, one of those kind of Hollywood things that I would run into in LA in the early 2000s. And I had been kind of excited to go because somebody who I had been running into just really randomly was this guy, Shane West, who was in this movie called A Walk to Remember. Didn't really see it, but he was great. I thought he was fantastic. And as he had come to Hollywood, my family had run into him and given him a whole bunch of advice and like, you should get an apartment here. And like, my grandpa had been like, you should do all this to Shane West, which is super random. But he was really polite about it. It was like, thank you. We just got here to LA. And, he ended up getting booked and started doing stuff. And just a really sweet guy. So I had seen that he had a band that was doing a show, so a bunch of people I knew, we all went to the show, and then there was a bunch of celebrities there, and everybody was there, and it was a little bit overwhelming, I think, because we were all like hanging out with like people from, television shows, from movie shows. Everybody's just kind of being themselves, and it was like me and a couple of people who were super not on TV at all. So people are looking at us like, "What are you guys doing here?" And I'm like, "I know the band." And we weren't in a Walk to Remember t-shirts either, so kind of set us apart because we were like kind of cool, random LA people who were actually there for these people, which was weird because we're not in Hollywood. So, and out comes Mark Wahlberg, and I was just kind of like, rock star! And he looked at me like, are you making fun of me? And I was like, rock star! Like, I'm totally making fun of your asshole. And he was like, oh, and I was like, rock star! Like, each time his face would get smaller, and I kept on yelling it louder and louder, and he was like, and he just came over to me, and I was like, oh, shit, Mark Wahlberg's walking over to me right now. And, it's one of those things when you doing something and you're like that annoying person and your friends are right behind you going, oh, ha, ha. And then when somebody walks over, all of a sudden they just disappear like they weren't even there. It's like smoke. You by yourself, right? You're accountable. So that there's nobody there left or right. Like you're the one who marked Mark Wahlberg. You'll be taking this one on your own, Faith. So he came up to me, and in real life, Mark Wahlberg has a very kind of soft spoken voice, right? In my experience, right? So he's like, "Hey, that's not really cool," and I'm like, and me, you get to know me, I'm a little unwilling to admit defeat. So I was like, well, listen, it wasn't cool when you hit those kids in the rocks, neither was it. Because I'm like, it really wasn't. And it had still pissed me off. And that's why I had mocked him, because I was like, I haven't really seen you talk about that. But, this is a long time ago, right? This is like walk to remember time. So this is like 2001, 2002. I mean, come on. So he's maybe 2005. Like he's just starting to make it places. He's not really, he hasn't done Boardwalk Empire. He's not, training everywhere. He's, what I'm saying? Like he's now somebody else. He's done a lot more work and has a lot more body of work to show who he is, I think, But when he came up to me in that moment, I said that to him and he looked at me and he was like, kind of taken back, like, okay, I'll give it to you. Like, I really have not done shit on that, But he was like, and he came back, he was like, but you could still be cool. And I was like, because I could be cool and I wasn't being cool and I could have been cool, right? And there is sometimes a propensity that I've had to, and somebody says you can get more flies with honey, and I'm always like vinegar, in the sense that my desire is to have more realness, to have this, like, rough, and not to say that life has to be terrible, but in the sense that when you're just kind of blowing smoke up people's, ears and stuff, and just telling them everything they want to hear, you're not really experiencing the trueness and the fullness of everything you can, obtain, if that makes sense, from a person. You're not exchanging, the true exchange, is what it felt like. And over time, I've realized that it's more a recognition that, there's some parts that are not, there's no, my fandom of that person does not equate a responsibility on their behalf to share with me any part of themselves, right? Like, and what a blessing it has been that they've shared anything at all. And in that moment, I was very much changed and chagrined, and shamed, and the people who were with me who had disappeared kind of floated back and went, "Ooh," and like gave Mark Wahlberg the hit. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, it was a full circle, complete humiliation, because I got dissed by Mark Wahlberg appropriately for being a not nice person. I could have been nicer, in the sense that I didn't need to mock him and just like get in his face and just go off, on behalf of random people and the stories that I had heard on the internet from like 3 people one time in a board, right? Like, who am I? Who are you? We don't know these people, And I would never, this is like this is the nightclub. He walked out of. I was on the side, the smoking area. Wasn't like a big deal. There wasn't a lot of people. There was no press there. There was not like a thing I was doing for something. It was just you walk out and it was kind of raggy a little bit. But many times I think what's really happening is that acknowledgement of insecurity and diminishment of indifference, right? We feel like we're nothing compared to somebody like this who is so big and, has done so much, and who are we? And, we say, well, you're nobody, you're not really anybody, and it's pretty transparent, I think, to people who have attained some ability, some knowledge of themselves in the world, because they're familiar with that phenomenon. And so I appreciate that, Marky Mark taught me a lesson. Yeah. Sometimes you need a little Marky Mark teaching lessons. It's not the worst thing. And he was hot while he did it, at the cross and everything. Really appreciate his faith and his practice as well. So, I say God bless him and his family.